Truth matters when it comes to public policy. And today, the truth, frankly, in our country is that natural resources, oil, gas, agriculture, minerals, everything matters and is our ace card when it comes to prosperity. The other truth is that Indigenous people, by an overwhelming majority, want to get on with business. So you don't want to miss my conversation today when it comes to where do Indigenous people stand when it comes to natural resources. John, it's been great to get to know you over the last while because it's very interesting your story. You're both an engineer, you've got a training in business as an MBA, but also in public policy. And I know you care deeply about Indigenous people as well as the country. And
Mhm.
I guess I just want to start off really quickly because we know that natural resources are really kind of foundational to our country's prosperity. Um, when you think of everything oil, gas, forestry, mining, fisheries, you name it, what's your vision for natural resources in this country?
Um, it again, it's that shared prosperity that is certainly equitable, right? And so I see, the full integration of rights as they're laid out in the Constitution, a respect for that rights, and an inclusion of Indigenous people in, the decision making, the co-governance, co-management of natural resources, and then really sharing that prosperity proportionally
Mhm.
and unlocking that potential, expediting, moving forward through, processes, regulatory permitting, financing, investor confidence. So much I think that can be achieved with, bringing all interested groups closer together.
Excellent. So, would it be fair to say you want everything? You want to see
One of the,
prosperity, you want to
yeah,
see business, and you want Indigenous people in, period.
yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Want to see more of it. I'm fortunate to witness, I think, some incredible examples across Canada where it is being done. So it's not like it's an abstract concept. It's just, I think we have an opportunity to start to level set some of these amazing things that are where we are unlocking Canada's potential.
All right, so let's go for the potential. And speaking of potential, one of the things that I found very interesting to learn from your perspective, John,
Mhm.
is your take on, I think, frankly, is an outrageous situation where you've got a noisy group of bullies, activists. I know people are entitled to their opinion, but it is a really
Mhm.
bizarre story. And I want to share this clip with you from some people from Hollywood.
Mhm.
Leonardo DiCaprio, Scarlett Johansson, and Mark Ruffalo are among a list of Hollywood stars who have signed a petition urging the Royal Bank of Canada to stop financing the Coastal GasLink. The Coastal GasLink is a gas pipeline set to cut through the Wet'suwet'en Territory in northwestern British Columbia without the consent of local hereditary chiefs. In Canada, opposition to the multi-billion-dollar natural gas pipeline has led to rallies and rail blockades across the country. The open letter was organized by Indigenous Climate Action. Other actors and artists who signed it include Taika Waititi, Jane Fonda, Robert Downey Jr., Ava DuVernay, Josh Gad, Mariska Hargitay, Rooney Mara, Julianne Moore, Joaquin Phoenix, Amy Schumer, Ben Stiller, and Marissa Tomei, among others. The open letter to City National Bank and Royal Bank of Canada reads, in part, stop funding fossil fuel expansion. City National Bank and Royal Bank of Canada must end the funding of extreme fossil fuel expansion projects, specifically fracking and tar sands. It goes on to say, City National Bank's parent company, Royal Bank of Canada, is bankrolling the climate crisis and violating the rights of Indigenous peoples.
So there you go. You get a clip of these people all lined up, Hollywood celebrities. Have
Mhm.
they ever talked to you, John, about what you think about natural resource development? Have they sat
Mm,
down and
cer-
had a cup of tea with you?
No, absolutely not. And I'd welcome the opportunity, but I've never had been approached or engaged by any celebrity on this matter. And again, absolutely welcome it because I think there's a deeper education needed. I think so that I think in a more appropriate position should be taken. So.
Well, what I find fascinating is that you have been doing a lot of research and that you found that a significant majority of Indigenous people actually want to see natural resource development occur. So tell us
Mhm.
more about that kind of work.
Absolutely. Again, our organization is 5 years old. We just kind of reached that 5-year benchmark. But we built the organization off a poll. And so we commissioned a poll, which we ran across Canada, and really to affirm what we felt anecdotally. There's a lot of people, Indigenous people, that were involved in resource development, and then we're moving it forward and filling those spaces and navigating the complexities and solutioning and getting things done and give voice to that. So we did poll. We said, okay, how do we substantiate this? So we polled across Canada and asked those questions around resource development. And the poll did find that 65% of the respondents were in favor of natural resource development. And it also didn't say that 35 were against. It said that, about 30% were kind of in the middle, and that there was a small minority that were strongly against. And so that affirmed that we needed to do work to change the story and the narrative of, Indigenous people and sentiment around resource development.
Well, you certainly don't hear that story in the legacy media in Canada. And in fact, I found some of these images kind of shocking because they reference the Wet'suwet'en. And I find it fascinating because the last time I checked, there were democratically elected chiefs for those First Nations. I believe, if memory serves, all of them are women who vehemently said, these people don't represent us. They're not representing us. So what the heck is going on when these people
Absolutely.
show up and they say we're against all of this, when in fact many people want to see prosperity and development. They want to see good jobs and opportunity and work together in a sensible way. So what is going on here, John? Help us.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Again, built off of that poll, that's generally consensus of where resource development happening. Indigenous people are not opposed to development, just opposed to being left out. And so when we're seeing that integration, that inclusion, and we're seeing, support of majority, it gets overshadowed. Again, by the sensationalization, and then unfortunately, with people of celebrity status, that being able to use that. And so, one of the challenges is there is people, Indigenous people with rights. There's Indigenous people that are strongly opposed. And and it's a challenge when you can align, you can cherry pick, the organizations or the groups or those leaders, and then to use that to kind of push a message that Indigenous people are against, and then again keep pushing that message out in media. And it's problematic because it doesn't represent the sentiment, and it doesn't represent the hard work that was done in that shared decision making at the community level. And that's a huge disconnect, right? And so, we wanted to again challenge that narrative. We wanted to tell the great stories that are happening where there is these groups coming together, where there is, resilient shared decision making, and communities are engaged, and then support. I think again leveling out, where this could happen, more consistently right across Canada. But yeah, again, it's a challenge. It's an absolute challenge.
Well, I want to commend you for taking up that challenge, that torch to get the word out, to be able to speak up, because it seems like, golly, there sure are a lot of activist groups out there. They're very well funded by, in many cases, parties here domestically, but even foreign foundations. I think of Tides as a good example. I mean, it's ironic that so many of them are intent on shutting down economic opportunity when in fact, the last time I checked, I mean, I have had the opportunity to work with many First Nations. I mean, there's really well, run and prosperous First Nations, but there's a lot of ones that are in very difficult situations in terms of poverty. So this is the opportunity, isn't it, John?
Absolutely, yeah. A lot of the communities struggling with issues of abject poverty, not just fiscal, but I mean, socioeconomic. And we hear leaders constantly saying, economic development, source revenues, and then that connection, that those source revenues, that economic development is one of their greatest drivers of self-determination. So now they can source fund, programs, services, infrastructure on their terms, and then a lot of the opportunities are right there in their backyard, and those development opportunities. And then that doesn't mean compromising on rights, compromising on environmental regulation or monitoring, whatnot. It just means a further integration of that Indigenous oversight. And there's again, that's happening all across Canada. And yes, this polarization, this radical, this radical view that, and then having Indigenous people viewed as against development, or
Hmm.
not being able to navigate, being able to exercise rights and advance development is a real challenge. And it's unfortunately it's a view across Canada with the public and the world as we do work, not just within the country, but as we do public engagement outside. And yeah, it's an unfortunate narrative that's influencing investor sentiment and influencing public policy. And we have to challenge that. So Indigenous people need to speak for
Yeah.
Indigenous people, and we'll give that microphone, and we'll give that
Hmm.
platform to those leaders that want to speak, on what
Hmm.
development looks like for them.
Well, I like how you're thinking, John, that we need facts and evidence to have a healthy discussion that leads to good public policy that serves all Canadians, including Indigenous people. And I guess frankly, I find some of the narrative that's put here is really, frankly, a lie. It's like they think well, to be very blunt, do they think we're stupid in the sense that it's all binary answers. It's either black or white. They oversimplify. It's like they think we are, you know, buying into this Avatar movie where, we can't work together and somehow develop natural resources in a way that benefits everybody. And we can look after the environment as well. We can actually walk and chew
Hmm.
gum at the same time.
Hmm. Absolutely. And it's certainly a more complex issue than that. And working with my peers that are working more intimately in a lot of these different projects, understanding kind of the geopolitical issues
Hmm.
around there. Climate change is a global phenomenon. It's not a Canadian phenomenon.
Hmm.
And what's our footprint and what's our contribution to it? Positive and negative in terms of, in
Hmm.
transformation and innovation. And so, Canada is incredibly one of the best places in terms of environmental responsibility, our
Hmm.
innovation, what we're doing to achieve, production and, satisfy world leading practices in environmental practice. And, if we struggle to kind of organize and mobilize, the world isn't, and it's going to move forward. Where they
Hmm.
don't necessarily have, constitutionally protected Indigenous rights. I hear why can't we build an LNG terminal like Germany did in less than a year? Well, they don't have Indigenous people with constitutionally protected rights, but that shouldn't be a barrier. We need to do the work to figure out how we can do that build in less than a year, but
Hmm.
still integrate, and ensure prosperity for all, ensure Indigenous inclusion, ensure Indigenous co-governance, co-management, and we can do it. Let's figure out,
Excellent.
as opposed to not, that not being
Hmm.
on the table. Let's do it. Let's figure it out. Let's do the hard work.
Yeah. Well, it's certainly you have a refreshing voice to hear, and it's one that I frankly think all Canadians need to hear to put into perspective what has often been kind of a misleading discussion, I think, that's been
Hmm.
enabled by a lot of partners, including the legacy media that we just again don't hear about this.
Hmm.
So bravo on you. So when we talk about going forward then, can you help us understand, the past here? If I think of projects like Northern Gateway, which is an
Hmm.
enormous project that was going to go to the West Coast, it was kiboshed, even though most First Nations were very much on board. What
Hmm.
happened to that project? Are there lessons learned from that kind of
Hmm.
fiasco? Where, I mean, I've heard estimates that we've basically forfeited uh, almost $100 billion in terms of revenues and opportunities. That would have benefited everybody, including
Hmm.
Indigenous people. What the heck
Hmm.
happened?
Yeah, well, to your last point, what we didn't do a good enough job is what are we leaving on the table? And that
Mhm.
understood. And then we got to weigh the pros and the cons. And so what are the adverse impacts? Well, what are the positive outcomes and impacts that come from making this decision? And so weigh that. And so what can we do with revenues like that to address like a lot of our issues?
Mhm.
How can we still kind of navigate, right? So that's one of the challenges. Do we understand what we left on the table, in terms of opportunity? The other thing that's changed and we've learned is what is appropriate, proportionate, and equitable in terms of Indigenous prosperity and opportunity within these projects. That has evolved. The relationship in terms of how, we engage with Indigenous people on projects has involved, where it's not so much stakeholders, not so much process driven. We view, I think you're seeing duty to consult, you're seeing consultation, you're seeing engagement as a way of building partnership and relation building, and how we can start to do this together, as opposed to manage and then just move forward. And then the enrichment of Indigenous people and the assets that are created through these projects, that is also new as well too, and on the table. So we've learned so much, and we've integrated those learnings. And so we see loan guarantee programs, we see ways to finance, co-finance. We see new understandings around consent and community, and shared decision, that are approached in much different ways, that are approached less transactional, less procedural, and more relational. There's more trust being built in good faith. And also we're learning that, if we do have a considerable support of Indigenous nations along those, development routes or development sites, that, we need to mobilize around that and organize around that, and then, make sure we're pushing a story on that. That challenges, a very, a minority or a radicalized position against it. So there's some incredible learnings from over the last 10 years, and we've accelerated and started to integrate those into project development. So it's a very different time. And so, I always encourage, let's revisit those projects or, opportunities or similar opportunities, because we have such a different methodology and we have a different way of looking at how to get those things done.
So when we look at success stories, are there ones that you would cite readily that have been win-wins?
Yeah, absolutely. The one that always comes top of mind is I think everyone hears, and maybe a lot of people know, and maybe it's worth kind of pushing out more. But you look at, Cedar LNG, a terminal owned by Haisla that is majority and driven by them. And so a great example of how, a community, got in front in terms of ownership and then helped to support consultation of its own members, where it, not only is it being consulted, it's doing the consulting as well too. And in terms of, permitting and investor confidence, there was considerable investor confidence in this project. They had strong backing, strong support, a resilient and sustained kind of consent and community-driven model. But some of the more interesting and exciting and lesser known things are, the outcomes out of that in terms of monitoring and managing the project, and what that means and what that meant for the community. And so they did a great job in terms of understanding, this development project is not just about revenue, and it is absolutely generational wealth, but, start planning and start actually implementing, socioeconomic programs and infrastructure and investment, things like that. And so things that make true differences. Dollars absolutely make differences, but how those dollars are spent makes an even bigger difference. And so talk about language revitalization and culture and things like that, and that's exciting. You look at Woodfibre, LNG, that terminal. One of the exciting things around that is the Squamish Nation is involved in regulation. They are co-regulating the development of and the implementation of that project, and that is another new exciting development over the last five or so years, and incredibly exciting projects. You look at a lot of the infrastructure projects in Ontario that were built public-private transmission lines and things like that, where equity was absolutely at front. It was table stakes, and co-management of these infrastructure projects, and so those are incredibly different as well too. So if equity isn't there, then there's co-management, co-governance, co-regulation, and it's being embraced, and it's I think it's creating more certainty around project timelines and permitting. I know it is, and you hear some of those nations that are moving through some of those permits. They're advocating alongside their industry partners, and there's more public confidence that they're satisfied, they're moving through those aspects, and they're going to achieve those outcomes. And
great.
It's better for development, better for business, better for the country.
So there's a lot of exciting different models and good examples that you just cited there, where we can do it. We can work together to do business for the benefit of everybody. And one of the things I find fascinating is even your own story, John. You worked with a company called Chemical. And can you tell us more about how you experienced this? Because, for you, your story illustrates that this is not just a theoretical proposition. You've
Mhm.
lived and breathed successful natural resource development.
Yeah, absolutely. It truly comes from a, lived and learned experience as an Indigenous person, Indigenous in northern Saskatchewan. And so, Cameco really was and really is a world leader in terms of, not just, of course, its business lines in terms of producing uranium for production of power, but also in terms of its relationship with its impact area, northern Saskatchewan, and
Mhm.
the mechanisms that kind of support that, agreements and surface lease agreements, and those were very, very novel and new instruments, which, we're only seeing over the last 10 years, but they were 30, 40-year-old agreements. But through that, it really pushed a, what is the kind of the spirit and intent of what we're trying to do. And so that company spearheaded a lot of kind of innovative practices in terms of, wanting to see that Northern and Indigenous representation in their organization, but wanted to see it at
Mhm.
depth. And then wanted to see, of course, business integration and through the supply chain, but wanted to see it at depth as well too. So very intent on not just dollars and cents, but just what does integration look like?
Mhm.
And I was the beneficiary of that. And so getting to work there in a industry sponsored program, getting to start there, and then working for a while, demonstrating interest to kind of continue educating myself. And their full support to do that, full support through providing me with the means to be able to go back to school. So I got my engineering degree fully supported and funded by Cameco, and incredible experience throughout
Wow.
that time and the engineering practice. And then in that, and in my work there, I'm very cognizant about that relationship and how do we, build capacity? How do we build, so that they're, generational wealth and seven generations is more than just money. It's how do we again, so how do I invest in myself? How do they invest in me? And how do we build off something, so that I can influence and there's a cascading influence in that way. And
Mhm.
absolutely great experience, and it is 100%, very influential in terms of my view. And then, yeah, absolutely watching, the monitoring, the production, the monitoring, the importance of
Mhm.
environmental inclusion of Indigenous and of Northern people in that process. And there was always that type of relationship in terms of transparency and trust.
Mhm.
And so, yeah, I got to experience so many best practices and help influence even stronger practices in my
Mhm.
time there. And it is one of the reasons why we can do this, and we don't have to polarize. This is not a zero-sum game, and we can all do this together
Mhm.
and address a lot of challenges, but in terms of our views of each other as different peoples, and then really come together, respect those
Mhm.
differences, and see we're stronger together.
Well, you certainly have lived and breathed it, John, and so it's an exciting, I think, illustration of
Hmm.
how great natural resource development can make a huge difference in people's lives. And
Hmm.
so, bravo on you. I think then what's interesting about your story is that in many ways you're a new generation of leaders who are
Hmm.
speaking up about this, saying this
Hmm.
is a, to use your words, a intergenerational opportunity to move
Hmm.
forward,
Hmm.
not just as Indigenous communities, but as a country. And so I've been impressed to learn more about your vision about how First Nations can work together to do more business for the benefit
Hmm.
of everybody.
Hmm.
Um, and as you know, our country is really struggling. We've had um, literally hundreds of billions of dollars leave this country net over the
Hmm.
last several years. We've all seen the chart. I think it's almost what is it? Almost $900 billion since
Hmm.
1990 leave the country.
Hmm.
And a lot of that is kind of as a result of the brutal reality that most businesses see Canada as a very difficult place to do business.
Hmm.
Business, it kind of goes to where there's opportunities and where you can get it
Hmm.
done. And so uncertainty breeds confusion and drives away business. So tell us more about your vision about how do we create better certainty and
Hmm.
working together that we can actually find more solutions to get, I think you used the phrase, how can we get First Nations business ready?
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Indigenous business, First Nation, Métis, Inuit. How do we get those communities so that we can mobilize quickly on opportunity? And it's really interesting. I love our country and our relationships. All the places where it's really working well. We have work to do like everyone else, and we really are our own greatest enemy. We are incredibly responsible as citizens, and we've created systems which don't necessarily you know support, I think, kind of the speed of investment and the speed of development. And we got to learn from that, and then we got to kind of figure out how do we not compromise on our existing systems and the integrity of the systems, but how do we make them more efficient, and how do we expedite development so it serves those needs. Similarly, when we think about indigenous communities and business ready, we need to think about that as well too. And so, as communities, it is, we need to position ourselves like how do we challenge that kind of process or that consultation framework, but it's how do we take advantage of it? Like how do we leverage it, and how do we really like unlock its potential and come into it in good faith? And so, as part of that, it's how do we organize ourselves, communities, of course, on the political side, do we have the appropriate do we have resilient, strong governance practices and policies, and then ideally, on the business side, do we have some of those tenets of nation building, is that can we separate politics and business? And then business side, do we have the appropriate structures, practices, to ensure that when these opportunities are come, we can economy of scale those businesses, to be able to support that? Do we have the networks? Do we have the people? And most important, do we have a strong framework on how we make decisions? To be able to support partnerships, to be able to support investment, that are resilient and transparent, and so that when we have partners, they can recognize, this is a strong community with strong act dev. They're able to separate politics and business. They make strong decisions that you can count on, and we can mobilize around these opportunities, and really take advantage of it and get that return on investment.
So John, just to clarify, when you say taking the politics out of business, what do you mean by that?
Yeah, and so less literal, more kind of more from a sense that when we're making business decisions, our timelines and how we make those business decisions, they need to be necessarily longer. But what we can't have is political interference, and so not build our business strategies around political cycles and who's coming and who's going out. And business development and shouldn't reflect kind of the political will, and shouldn't be tied to any one leader. It should be kind of a community effort. And so when we're pulling that politics out of business, is how do we, absolutely, I've seen incredibly well-versed and capable elected leaders who can absolutely switch between those two different things, and so can pull off their political mandate and advance the business mandate and execute on their fiduciary duty, their duty of care in relation to business development. And I've seen, and then being able to go back and then make political decisions that isolate kind of the business and things like that.
Right on.
So
what you're talking about is you got to have well-run First Nations and other communities, so that people have a confidence that you can even partner. Like if you're going to invest tens of millions, let alone billions of dollars, you want to know that these commitments are rock solid, that suddenly they're not going to change next year if there's a new council. Is that what you're getting at?
Essentially, yeah, and I think that's true for anything. That's just business philosophy, right? You want to know their stability, in terms of who you're doing business with. But I want to also say that I think what I'd like to compel is not only don't only seek the businesses and the communities that are far more mature in terms of how they do this. Also understand that a lot of these communities are on a spectrum in terms of how they're getting there. They have the desire to get there, and I compel industry and investors to continue to work with them. They might not necessarily have again that structure, that governance. But they're on a path to go there, and then continue to work with them and build a relationship around that, and then get to the
Right on.
point where you have the confidence in that decision, stuff like that. So yeah, I certainly urge, like, yeah, seek that type of assurance, but also know that there's a lot of communities that are going there, and they still need support. They still need industry involvement, and not to be discouraged that they don't necessarily have the infrastructure that this well advanced First Nation, Métis, Inuit community has. But yeah, still continue to work with those communities, because
Exactly.
that's reconciliation.
Yeah, there's a lot of communities that really do bring a goodwill and do want to work together.
Hmm.
And I think there's an irony to this as well, if I can be so blunt, is that we need to, the rest of us at the federal, provincial, municipal level, do the same thing. I mean, this is always the same issue. I was a
Yep.
former mayor. People just want to come
Hmm.
and do business and know what the heck the rules are so they can do business. And I look at
Hmm.
that case. I mean, I think the the Coastal Gas Link is a fascinating example, John, and you're familiar with it.
Hmm.
But you know the story. A number of years ago, there were activists that came out and exercised all kinds of violence with their axes. They created millions of dollars worth of damage.
Hmm.
Workers had to frankly run away in fear for being
Hmm.
assaulted. And to
Hmm.
this day, I am not aware of any charges on that kind of violence, those kinds of
Hmm.
assaults. And I just find this stunning because rules matter. The rule of law
Hmm.
matters. So
Hmm.
this puts enormous amounts of costs in terms of security and personnel to guard these facilities now, all
Hmm.
because we don't seem to be enforcing the law. I mean, that
Hmm.
that is a good opportunity, isn't it, on our end, everyone's end, to make sure that the rules of law are enforced. Is that a fair
Hmm.
comment?
Yeah, it is a fair comment. I think, there is, things that, those examples, absolutely. We do not condone acts of violence, and
Hmm.
respecting those boundaries. And there's other ways to be able to advance, those issues. And this is a very sensitive topic, and absolutely, and I get, like, for activists and not non-Indigenous activists, I think a little less sympathy. For Indigenous activists, a little more sympathy. And so, I get being upset with, especially what's happened in the past and what continues to happen.
Hmm.
But again, from that kind of practical, positive, in good faith outlook, there's absolutely better ways to kind of get to, and address a lot of those issues. And what's unfortunate is that undermines usually a lot of that is already going on. And so, like we talked about, and there's that type of activity, that doesn't represent, the Indigenous majority or generally Indigenous sentiment,
Hmm.
and it gets treated as such, right? And it gets represented as such. But there absolutely needs to be accountability. Like I said, I get the frustration, but there's better ways to resolve these issues. And the other thing is in the past, it was very challenging getting to the point where we're at now. But I think there's enough peer pressure, from industry. There's enough, public sentiment and understanding that, the appropriate inclusion of Indigenous people. I don't see it as something that absolutely needs to happen, especially from that
Hmm.
Indigenous perspective. But again, a lot less sympathy, I think, for non-Indigenous actors with their agendas and whatnot. And yeah, and
Hmm.
absolutely need to respect kind of those rules, right? And there's, those things are there for ensure the safety of everyone else involved.
You bet. So I want to turn to 2025. We've seen a lot
Hmm.
of talk about national priority projects and getting this country moving again. There has been
Hmm.
no pipeline proposals, but that has changed this recently with the province of Alberta. And I wanted to share this initiative, this clip
Hmm.
with you.
We've come together here today because Canada stands at a critical crossroads. Beneath our feet here in Alberta, we stand on oil reserves valued at over $9 trillion. What stands before us right now is a once-in-a-generation opportunity to unlock our wealth of resources and become a world-leading energy superpower. And that's why we are announcing that the Government of Alberta will be the proponent of an oil pipeline to the Northwest BC coast, with the support and technical advice of 3 major pipeline companies, including Southbow, Enbridge, and Trans Mountain. Our government will make a formal application to the Federal Project Office under the Building Canada Act. With today's announcement, Alberta is prepared to answer the call to support global energy security efforts while creating lasting prosperity for Albertans and Canadians for generations to come.
So there's the Premier of Alberta, Daniel Smith, mapping out that kind of vision. What do you think about that initiative to help clear the way so that things can happen?
It's a bold move, and I think a play that needed to kind of force a lot of issues, right, and kind of work through some of the issues that we have in interprovincial trade, and then barriers and jurisdiction and things like that, and things we need to test, absolutely, and I've been watching it very closely, and of course staying kind of within our lane. What is the Indigenous support around that? And what is, and also interestingly enough, what's the Indigenous opposition around that? Is there a way to kind of balance those aspects, balance those interests, make sure that they're heard appropriately? Some of the opposition around that, is it important? It's important to look at things from, modern day context. So are we evaluating the opportunity? Are we weighing the pros and cons? Is there better ways to kind of manage the risk around these things? And so it is an important, bold move that I think we need to test and test in an expedited fashion some of the challenges that we're seeing today, and just start to work through them.
Right on. So in this case, I'm also fascinated by the public policy discussion. You have some parties, I think of Premier David Eby from BC, basically critiquing the initiative in the sense that, if I understand it, well, there's no proposal. No one's coming forward with private money to do it. And I look at it and I say, well, isn't this a classic chicken and egg situation where no one will come forward with a private proposal as long as the federal government keeps this suite of frankly disastrous policies that prevent anything from going forward? Like, I think of Bill C-48, the tanker ban on the West Coast. I mean, there's a whole raft of them. Would you agree with that?
Yes, that's the sentiment. And so, again, current legislation, it's essentially, it doesn't make economic sense to build, pipelines and oil pipelines, and there's so much risk around
because
it,
the
right?
federal
And
government has made sure it isn't economic.
yeah, absolutely,
Isn't it?
right? And so, and then, it's problematic. I think there was a lot of recommendations to be able to make, 48 so that we can navigate it and still continue to build. But it's time to revisit from, what is kind of, what's the Indigenous sentiment around it, those who are, that are supportive of it, of supporting of repealing and on reforming it, and ensuring that there's benefits, and those who have issue. Is there ways to kind of manage, some of those concerns around it? But we need to jump into it, we need to revisit it, and to make sure that, those opportunities are still on the table, that we can, it's certainly the commodity that is generating a majority of wealth for Canada, and recognizing that, and then also weighing that in the context of, our contribution, our position in the world economy, and what's happening, and our position and our contribution in terms of what's happening in terms of climate change, right? And as we advance innovation and transformation here in Canada, making sure that we get our responsible resources to, and they're needed and they're wanted.
Well, and that's a great point, John, is that they're needed and wanted by the world. We've got most world leaders coming cap in hand to Canada, Germany, Japan, Greece, the UK. I mean, I could name a whole bunch of others, as you can, that want our energy, our natural resources. I mean, this is, again, one of our strategic ace cards for prosperity. And it's amazing. At Frontier, we also do research. And what's fascinating is we've been able to announce a number that of the money that we forfeit every year because we're a price taker not a price maker, because we only have one primary customer for our oil
Hmm.
and gas, and that's generally the United States. So we don't get the full market price, the world price,
Hmm.
as other countries do that have multiple customers. So we
Hmm.
forfeit, like it's a dynamic number, easily 30, $50 billion a year. And I just
Hmm.
marvel at this. Like, what elected officials, what leaders of a country forfeit that opportunity? That, I mean, that, think of the difference, John, that could make in the lives of Canadians. I mean,
Hmm.
this is the opportunity, is it not, John?
No, it absolutely is. And, we're in, we're certainly in cycles, as we see into the early, the 2000s into the 2010s, what's the impact of our activity?
Hmm.
And again, we swung the pendulum on regulation and permitting to kind of respond to those, and without a full understanding of what is the economic impact of this type of um,
Hmm.
almost ideology, right? And so um, and now again, what did we leave on the table? I talk about some of those projects, like when we evaluated, like again, Trans Mountain and the different kind of projects that we've shuttered and shelved and put away. What is the economic impact of that, and what is the adverse impact of
Exactly.
that, and what is the global
Hmm.
context of this, and really making decisions that and strong leadership around those decisions, because there's
Hmm.
much more to the picture, and doing a better job educating our public in regards to what these decisions mean, right? And so
Right on.
um, we need to be innovators. We need to be responsible. Yeah.
Well, I like your idea that we really need to be innovators and leaders in terms of
Hmm.
these sectors. And John, I just think of the impact on people. I mean,
Hmm.
um, as we go to First Nations, I mean, this should be top of mind for anybody who's
Hmm.
ever visited a First Nation. Um,
Hmm.
I mean, this is where I would challenge the fancy celebrities from Hollywood or from downtown Toronto to go to a
Hmm.
First Nation and actually see the measure of
Hmm.
poverty before them.
Hmm.
And I found it actually interesting last week. I don't know if you noticed this, John, but Blacklock's media from Stats Canada revealed that they do not include in their unemployment statistics First
Hmm.
Nations.
Hmm.
Does that surprise you? I mean, to me, this should be information that
Hmm.
underlines what we
Hmm.
need to do to move this country forward and its urgency.
Hmm. Absolutely. No, no, we should understand that, right? The unemployment rates, First Nation, Métis, Inuit, and again, the issues are absolutely, they're deeper, and then they're more complex, certainly. But yeah, creating the opportunity where Indigenous people, not, deeper than jobs, and so where Indigenous people are kind of leading the development of those jobs and creating the environment in which Indigenous people are encouraged to kind of participate. But we need economic activity for that to happen,
Right on.
and we need investment for that to happen.
So when we look at going forward, obviously we've talked about a lot of solutions today, not the least of which is, well, understanding what is really going on when it comes to
Hmm.
the goodwill that the majority of Indigenous people bring to
Hmm.
natural resource development. And
Hmm.
are there other solutions that Canadians can do when we look at this situation? If we want to get things going forward, what's your advice, John, in terms of solutions?
Yeah, again, there's certainly issues. We need to continue to build trust and rebuild trust, right? And so we're dealing with
Mhm.
a lot of historic and legacy issues. And unfortunately, pockets where that trust is betrayed. It isn't, unfortunately, it's not the norm anymore, but there is still proponents, there's still relationships, there is still, unequitable kind of, relationships in terms of development. But again, not becoming the norm. Um,
Mhm.
and then it's about building that relationship and building that trust, and so that we can move through things like consultation in good faith, right? And so
Mhm.
we can trust that. And then the other thing, the another important aspect too is really Indigenous people are self-determining at rates than we've ever seen, and so we're starting to kind of carve our own destiny and move forward on our own terms. But a big part of that is is we really struggle with the paternalism. And so,
Mm.
what is good for us? What's right for us? This is good for you. This is what you need. Really not including Indigenous people and kind of, okay, we need to define solutions for us. And we see
Mhm.
that. We see where Indigenous people are developing kind of processes, procedures, programs. Solutions are so we're dealing with unemployment at greater rates than people trying to deal with unemployment for us. We're building, jobs and careers and things like that quicker in those environments. But all tied to the economic activity and opportunity that's happening. And
Mhm.
so, yeah, it's the paternalism, building trust, and really, I think building a relationship, restoring a relationship Canada and Indigenous people, and I think that's an important place to start, and then really build off of where it's really working well.
Well, right on. Well, John, I like the way you think. Let's do business together and build this incredible country for Indigenous people in all of Canada. So thank you for joining us today and for your leadership.
Absolutely, my pleasure, David.
Thank you for watching Leaders on the Frontier. We're a nonpartisan think tank. We explore ideas, policy, and practical solutions that can make a difference in the lives of Canadians. We do not accept any government funding. We work for you. Thank you for supporting Frontier. Visit fcpp.org to give. While you're there, be sure to check out our latest articles and research. Without open discussion and debate, you're not thinking, nor are you free. Comment below. We'd love for you to join the conversation.